Hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 5, Episode 5, Dedicado and Max. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 5, Episode 5. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, this episode was okay. Like, it was a good episode. I liked it. I have a feeling I'm going to need to re-emphasize over and over and over again throughout this review that this is a good episode. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. But, if I'm being honest, I think it was probably the weaker of the episodes that aired so far. I wouldn't say necessarily that it was slow. I mean, it certainly wasn't filler. That's for sure, but because a lot of what happened in this episode does contribute greatly to the character stories ongoing. So it is one of those link in a chain episodes. And also, I wouldn't say it was slow. It was actually arguably moved a bit faster than some other episodes did. It's more of the fact that this episode, okay, it had two storylines going, and one was entirely focused on Chem's storyline, her sort of internal struggle and with what she's, her guilty conscience, whatever. Externally it was about, of course, that dude who refuses to leave his house. And the other storyline had to do with Mike and his sort of getting over his sort of the suicidal death run that he's on and recovering from his physical injuries that were a result of that sort of those tendencies. So these are both worthwhile stories. Do not misunderstand me here. They both contribute to the overall thing of the show, and they contribute a lot to it. And the things that happen in this episode do develop both of those characters, Chem and Mike, particularly a lot. But if I'm being honest, this episode we got no sort of the crime stuff, at least as far as like Saul Goodman's concerned. Like, his involvement didn't touch on that at all, and even on the other side, we didn't really follow the sort of crime aspect of it that much. Now, Gus was in this episode, but it was mainly had to do as far as Mike's recovering and him courting Mike, which again, very important. But we got no Lalo, we got no Nacho, and so we had no sort of development on that side of things. Also, this wasn't really a Saul Goodman episode, and I'll make the case how this was more, when we see Jimmy in this episode, he's being more of Jimmy McGill than he is being Saul Goodman, and I'll get more into that later. But even in that storyline, it wasn't really about him, it was about Chem. And again, nothing wrong with that. I love Chem, she's a great character, but this episode just wasn't as interesting to me as other episodes, because I do really much like the Saul Goodman storyline. I do very much like the crime stuff that they're doing with Nacho. Like, Nacho, I think, has been one of the highlights of the season. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying this is a bad episode, again, by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want to get any fanboy comments saying, "Oh, you hate this show. Why do you hate this show?" I don't. I love this show. I think it's amazing. I like this episode. But and in fact, if this is in fact the weakest episode of the season, then this is going to be a great season. That bodes very well. Because if this, which is a good, interesting episode with a lot of great character beats, if this is the weakest they got, then this is an amazing season. That's all I'm saying. Okay, I guess I'll try not to re-emphasize this later. But anyway, let's get into some of this good character stuff. So let's start with the Chem storyline. As I said, this is a Chem storyline. And it's interesting because I talk a lot about how the Chem and Jimmy relationship is dying, and they portrayed that in earlier episodes where they were very distant and cold with each other. But in this episode is an example where the relationship is very lively. And again, this gets back into that same pattern, because they're working on a scheme together. So whenever they work on a scheme together, that's always when the relationship is at its height. So throughout this episode, they're working on a scheme. So throughout this episode, the relationship is in really high standing. It's really good. But of course, that pattern by itself is very poisonous and doesn't bode well for the longevity of their relationship, because as soon as the scheme is over, then the relationship is going to plummet again unless they get another scheme, and relying on these schemes to keep the relationship alive is not very healthy. So I do think that is very interesting, because we get this scene towards the start of the episode where Jimmy is asking Kim about the specifics of her meeting with Mercer Verde, and she starts imitating the guy, which it was a funny scene, and then Jimmy pretends to be Kim, and then they eventually end up getting in the shower together while they're in character, which is, again, it shows how the relationship is lively at the moment, but having to do because they're working on the scheme. And also it's bringing out Kim's resentment toward the Mercer Verde guy a lot more, because and Jimmy even points out later in the episode, they're her bread and butter, and they're what's keeping her career going. It's what's keeping, her livelihood basically is all dependent on them. But she's obviously had these deep-seated resentment towards it, and it was brought out in the earlier episode by that dude who refused to leave his house, because when he yelled at her saying that she was one of the bad guys, and she yelled at him at first saying, "Oh, that's not true," but obviously her subconscious thinks it is true, and that the pro bono work was a subconscious effort to try to allay some of that guilt she felt. So now it's hatred, that resentment towards Mercer Verde, who had, by the way, been nothing but nice to her. But that resentment that they're kind of this evil bank or whatever, and that she feels like she's selling her soul by working for them, is starting to come out and growing by doing this, role-playing thing, is only bringing it out more to the surface, which is very unhealthy for Kim. She starts to plummet a bit more, but then again, Jimmy, of course, gets benefits out of it. So it's a really interesting give and take thing that they got here. Now, earlier I said that this was more of Jimmy than it was Saul Goodman in this episode. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So sure, we do see him up to his antics, as he always does, his nutty antics, which were quite humorous in this episode, how he kept having all these inventive ways to delay the construction workers from taking down that dude's house. And by the way, I love the way that dude just worked so in sync with Jimmy in this episode to delay them. They took the numbers off the mailbox, or they sprinkled stuff from smoke detectors and make people think there was too much radiation. And then he planted pottery to make it think there was some archaeological find. That's all funny stuff, and you may think well, Mark, what are you talking about? That's typical classic Saul Goodman. I don't think it is, actually. I think this is classical Slipping Jimmy, more it is classical Saul Goodman. Not even Slipping Jimmy, sort of more just Jimmy, Jimmy McGill, because alright, what I mean by that is Saul Goodman, and especially as we've seen in Breaking Bad, is motivated by one thing and one thing alone: money. He doesn't give a crap, he doesn't give a fuck about anybody. He's just all about, earning the bucks and bulking at the system. Where I guess he's kind of bulking at the system here, but this is more to do with he's doing a favor for Kim, and you can tell that his intentions are really good, that he loves Kim and he likes to see her happy. He doesn't like to see her feeling guilty or down, which you can tell that she was very upset over this dude losing his house. So he is doing this for her, and this is why I would say this is very much Jimmy McGill, because she's actually, even though he's doing these silly, ridiculous antics, it's coming from a good place. It's coming from a heart of gold. It's coming from his love to Kim, for Kim, basically, for him wanting to help her. And whereas Saul Goodman type, again, is all about, well, as we saw in the previous episode with those dudes who say 50% off, like, he's basically conning them, like, go to your grandmother and get more money. It was all about money, money, money. So this is showing us that Jimmy isn't completely Saul Goodman yet, because the Saul Goodman of Breaking Bad would never do this, never do a favor for a friend like this. So there's still that good aspect to him, that Jimmy aspect, and this is something that's going to get withered down in this season and the next. So it's going to be interesting to see how exactly that happens, but at the moment we see there's still a good aspect to him, even if it leads to these dirty antics. And by the way, I don't believe that he's just using Kim's, her predicament as an excuse to do antics. I don't think that's the case personally, because he could always do antics whenever he likes. I mean, he may be doing this because he can see it strengthens the lust and the passion and his relationship with Kim. That definitely may have an effect to it, but I think it also comes from a place of not wanting to see Kim be sad, basically. So I don't know. So it's not completely healthy, but it's definitely funny. Now, also we get the thing with Howard. Now, this is the phone call with Howard. I don't know. I'm gonna be a bit cynical on this one. Again, I'll get the fanboys angry, but I'm gonna be a bit cynical on this one and say, like, to me, this seems kind of like just an excuse to keep Howard in the show. It doesn't seem like he's really relevant anymore. They just like this actor and want to keep him around. And don't get me wrong, he's a good actor, but it's because it doesn't add anything. It's basically just rehashing him saying, "Oh, Jimmy, you still have you given any thought to the offer?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure," and hangs up on him. I mean, they made this very clear. I don't know where they're going with this, and even if they do go somewhere with this, it seems like this scene is unnecessary, that they already accomplished what Jimmy's feelings on this, and what, as I talked about in the previous episode, Howard is guilty over the way he treated Jimmy, over what happened to Chuck, and so him hiring Jimmy is a way to alleviate his conscience. And of course Jimmy wants nothing to do with Howard because he relates him to Chuck, and people had been keeping him down his whole life. So this adds nothing to that. We already got that from the previous scene, so it seems like they just need to give that actor something to do. I don't know. Again, that's my cynical comment of the day. But getting back to Kim, which, as I said, was more the focus of the episode, it's interesting that it's kind of... I don't really have an issue with it, but it is this plot kind of has to do it. But that scene with the Mercer Verde guy, when Kim and Rich go to him and look, your best option and the best thing to do is just to go to this other lot. It's going to save you a lot more money, a lot more time, a lot more hassle. It would be best for the company. But the dude gets nah, fuck that. I'm not going to let this guy bully me off my own land. Screw this. I'm going to fight him tooth and nail. And this is something that I would say it is something that needed to happen for the plot, because if he did agree to it, then there would be no storyline with the dude trying to give up this house, and they obviously want to keep the storyline going. But it is believable that someone would be like that, and it's also in keeping with the theme, which is very common throughout Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, particularly with Breaking Bad, because Walter White was the main one who did this. And Better Call Saul is more of Mike who does this a lot, and I'm talking about letting their pride control them. About not the people making the wrong decisions or bad decisions or just idiotic or asshole-ish decisions because of their pride, because their pride gets in their way. And clearly that's all this dude was affecting him to make this decision, because as Rich and Kim were making clear, the better, smarter, business decision would just to be, well, fuck this guy, let's go somewhere else. But no, the dude's pride got in his way. He's like, nah, I can't let him win. I'm gonna beat him. And it's obvious that this is completely lowered Kim's opinion of him. Because I said before, like, Kim was all, there'd been nothing but nice to her, and they heaped all this praise on her, and they provided her with her livelihood, but she always had that twinge in the back of her head that they're a bit, maybe not the nicest people to work for, or maybe she feels a bit guilty for the way they bully people around, and that was brought up more with that old dude who's, refused to leave his house, how he got upset over it, but now it's got even worse, the fact that he's being like an asshole over this and refusing to back down because of his pride is going to completely destroy any sort of positive feelings Kim had about working for Mercer Verde. So this, again, as I said, this storyline does greatly affect Kim's storyline, and what's going to go forward, because we still we know something's going to happen between Kim and Jimmy, but we have no idea what it is. And this is definitely a strong building block to what's going to happen to Kim in her future, because I don't really see her continuing to work for Mercer Verde after this. Even if this whole situation's resolved, even if she and Jimmy win, I think her opinion of this guy in particular, particularly with this scene when he's freaking out, I was like, no, fuck him, I'm going to fight him tooth and nail, I'm not backing down from a fight. I don't see how. I think this is going to destroy any positive feelings Kim had about them, and I don't see her being able to work with Mercer Verde going forward, but we'll see. Also interesting, of course, is Rich's reaction. I like this character. I like that they keep him around, too. He just had a brief cameo in season 1, but of course Kim went to work for him. And how he could tell, because he's a good lawyer. He's a smart lawyer. He's a clever person. And so he could tell right away, even if Mercer Verde were a bit blinded for how much they like Kim, he could tell what was going on with Kim. And he tries to be, low-key about it, because he doesn't want to offend Kim or hurt her feelings. And in fact, when he says he's trying to protect her, I think he's being completely genuine. That he was just like, look, why don't you just let me take over? I can give you this other case to work on. And of course Kim eventually gets it out of him, like, where's this coming from? This makes no sense. And she gets it out of him that he's like, look, if you really want me to spell it out for you, you came to me, I had to bug you to get involved in this case, and you absolutely refused to do it, and finally you did, but then you pushed really hard for Mercer Verde to leave this guy alone and build somewhere else, and when they refused to do it, all of a sudden your boyfriend gets involved and delays everything. And he's right. Obviously he's right, and he's very smart to put the pieces together. But of course Kim just denies it, like, extremely, to the fact of following him in the hallway and yelling at him in public, saying that she fought for this Mercer Verde account, and why the hell would she let some stupid old guy ruin it for her? But of course, Rich is right. She's completely lying here. And I think what's important here is that she's not only lying to Rich, she's lying to herself. I mean, she knows, of course, that she got Jimmy involved, but she's lying to herself in the terms of her wanting to work for Mercer Verde. This is her internal struggle of her wanting to keep this, because it is a very good financial deal for her. She's making a really good living off of this, and it allows her to do her pro bono stuff. But as I said, like, especially after the way that dude freaked out, she's feeling incredibly depressed and guilty over working for people like this. So that was kind of part of her internal struggle as much as anything. But that was a really great scene when she was like yelling at Rich like that. And I'm actually fearful for her standing at the firm now after that incident. And it's showing how much this is kind of destroying her professional life. as well. So again, it's really interesting stuff. So let me now move over to the Mike stuff. This storyline I wasn't as interested in, to be honest, but it is necessary, of course, for Mike's storyline, his journey through the season. Although, as I mentioned in previous videos, I wasn't a big fan of this, and at first I didn't see where they were going with this because Mike was on the path to self-destruction after, of course, he had to kill that German guy. And he got to the path of self-destruction where he nearly died. But Gus, swooped in, saved his life, took him to this place in Mexico, his farm in the middle of nowhere. And we see the same doctor dude that we saw in Breaking Bad, and he made a couple appearances earlier in Better Call Saul as well. The doctor guy that works for Gus. And so I mean, it's kind of a character beat where he's kind of learning to get over his shit, but I just didn't. It's necessary. I just didn't really find it all that interesting. And plus, I can't remember. Did Mike speak Spanish in Breaking Bad? I think he might have, because in earlier Better Call Saul, he didn't speak Spanish. So here is like he's staying at this, with this housekeeper nurse who only speaks Spanish. So he's kind of learning Spanish through necessity. Which I don't know. Who cares? But the thing is, and then he keeps trying to get in contact with the outside world, and eventually calls Gus, and he's just like, I can't talk now, and he gets pissed off. And of course, we get the earlier scene with Jimmy trying to recruit him as a PI, which of course did not work. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going to touch back on the Jimmy stuff a bit because I forgot about the scene with Simon from The Walking Dead. Well, the actor, like he appeared in the first season, the Pimento, where he was like attacking Mike, because he's obviously a capable PI, which they made clear in this episode. But he was the one who was giving Mike shit about not bringing the gun, and so Mike just kicked his ass. So he's good at his job, but he's obviously just a bit prone to violence and a bit crazy that way. And so that's the way they portrayed him in this episode, which I thought was great and funny. How it's just like, if you want, I can just get some guys and beat the shit out of him. Whatever. But anyway, getting back to Mike, so Mike turned Jimmy down, of course, because he's in the middle of nowhere and he's injured, so he's not in any position to help. But we do know from Breaking Bad that Mike will eventually will do more PI work for Jimmy, because that's when we first meet him. So eventually he's going to get back to doing more PI work for him. And I guess the work with the Simon guy sort of reinforced to Jimmy how much better Mike is than other people. He even had to say to Kim, it was like, sorry, my normal guy is usually much better than this. But anyway, so eventually Gus does come down, and Gus sort of lays it all out for him that, look, you're on the path you're on. You know as well as I do. We both fully know where this leads. And Mike's like, yeah, I know. And of course it leads to his death, is what they're talking about. And but I don't know. I don't know if this storyline is constructed in a way that makes me believe that Mike would go work for Gus, because we knew this is what it's leading to, because that's what it was in Breaking Bad, where Mike was Gus's right-hand man. And I see it from Gus's perspective, definitely, because he even lays it out. Look, I am in a war right now, and I need good soldiers, and you're a good soldier. And this is something I've been saying for a long time, that Gus saw this in Mike, which is why he sort of kept him around, because he saw how efficient Mike was, and how effective he was, and how methodical Mike was, which was very similar to the way Gus operates. In fact, he's very sort of logic-based and professional and methodical. And so he sees those same qualities in Mike, and smart enough to see that he would be an amazing asset to his venture. So that I completely buy. What I don't buy as much is Mike's motivations for doing this, unless maybe they'll explore this a bit more. Because I think by having Mike kill the German dude and get depressed and suicidal over it, it seems like they sort of wrote themselves in the hole, because I don't really buy that he would ever go from that position to being Gus's right-hand man. But I don't know, maybe, again, the fanboy's going to hate me, but just being a bit critical. So, I don't know, maybe they will develop it later on to make it make a bit more sense, but right now, where Mike is like, well, what's the difference if I work for, he's, for you, you're an evil drug dealer, but you want me to work for you so you can fight these other evil drug dealers. Like, what's the difference? And Gus is like, there is a difference between me and them. And there is. Like, the Salamancas are a bit more crazy and off the walls, particularly Tuco. But Gus is really evil as well, so I don't think that's a compelling argument. I don't really buy that's a good enough argument to convince Mike, because Gus was the one who forced him to kill that German guy that he really liked. So I don't know if I really buy that Mike would turn around like this, but I don't know. Maybe I'll buy it a bit more later on. We'll see. Anyway, so my rating for Dedicado MX out of 10 is a 6. Good. It's very close to giving this a 7 because of the Chem stuff, because as I say, I don't want to sound like I'm too down on it. I actually loved the Chem stuff and the development it did for her character. The Mike stuff was okay, mostly boring, but it kind of helps his character along. But as I said, I'm not as on board with that storyline. But as an episode of Better Call Saul, there just wasn't enough there compared to other episodes. So compared to other episodes, it's not quite as powerful. So that's why I decided to go with a 6 instead of a 7. But still, positive rating. Still a good episode. Still liked it. And as I said, if this is the weakest episode of the season, then that bodes very well for the season. That a good episode like this is the worst they can do. Anyway, so that's it for my review of Better Call Saul episode 5. I shall be back next week for episode 6, so be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Picard, The Expanse, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot for watching.